Welcome to Have You Heard, where we talk about issues at the intersection of agriculture and engineering. Let's get started. Here are your hosts, Morgan Hayes and Josh Jackson.
Welcome. This is the Have You Heard podcast. This is episode 43. We're going to talk today a little bit about hay feeder design. I'm Morgan Hayes, an assistant professor in Biosystems and Ag Engineering here at the University of Kentucky, focusing on livestock facilities. And in my personal life, I farm in Boyle County, Kentucky with my husband. We have about a 500-acre commercial cattle and hay operation.
And I'm Josh Jackson, I'm a professor in Biosystems Agriculture Engineering as well, focused on precision livestock farming. And in my personal life, my family raises registering as cattle and focuses on some hay production as well.
Okay, Josh. So before we get into our favorite topic, hay feeder design, let's talk a little bit about what's been happening on the farm this week.
We pretty much similar to other weeks. We spent a good bit of time putting out hay. I even put out hay this morning. Actually, it's pretty wet out there. It's pretty wet this weekend and still wet today. I actually have our old Ford 8600 tractor about trying to back up into the hay barn. I couldn't. It's got a little bit of a hill there. Couldn't make it in there, backing it up. So I had to do some finagling to actually get some bales.
There you go.
So it's been fairly muddy, and also worked on trying to fix some equipment. So did some welding over the weekend.
That sounds like pretty good. Feeling a little better. Family's getting a little more stabilized. I know last week was a little wild.
Joy was still down. Katie was still down, but they were doing better by Monday. So.
Good. That's good. There's always lots happening. I know from personal experience when you have a baby, like everything on the farm has to keep happening, but it makes it trickier to get those things done.
You start I never knew how to juggle, but that's pretty much what we're doing. We're just kind of out there just juggling. Okay, what fire is burning essentially, and then we'll go to that one.
Yeah, we sort of are in similar boat. My husband's been traveling this past week, so I have been on primary farm duty. That's a lot of animals for me to check. We do have some help helping us with a few of the checks, but no one else puts out hay but me. So when hay actually has to go out, that's my responsibility. Someone else can generally do a basic check of animals to make sure they're there, but I have to move around fences, bring out bales, do that kind of stuff. So just figuring out how to time everything to make sense with my work schedule, since I teach in the mornings here on campus. So
makes it challenging, but we'd actually did some checks this past week, and we were just checking electric fence lines and whatnot, and we were having a battery issue. That's why we were going ahead and checking fences. Had a couple trees down, actually. I was surprised the cattle hadn't gotten out. I was surprised. Maybe they just hadn't decided to climb over the fence yet.
There's always an time for that to happen, so probably after you fix the fence is when it's going to happen. Yeah, we also had to change out a solar box. That's probably not an issue with bad batteries as much as just the weather and the way that box is oriented where it was. It was just oriented in the wrong direction. So now that it's been turned to face south, it should recharge itself, hopefully.
Okay.
But we have one fence line where if we turn it south, it's in the field with the animals and they like to rub on it. So it gets turned to the north, which inhibits light already on top of a shorter day in the middle of winter and stuff, so it got drained. So
able to adjust it down, maybe not hitting as frequently. Be able to
we could do that, but in fact it's not a field that we're typically in. It's just that the fence got left on in a different spot where they were only in there because we were replacing fence. It was a safe spot to put the animals in the interim while we were working on a different fence line, a perimeter line. And so now that they came out, we were able to move that box back up and change it out. So, but that's the one thing I will say that is a challenge with solar boxes is that you are constantly managing the solar system, the battery system, and making sure the fence itself is working correctly in terms of leaks and grounds and things like that. So
it's a constant challenge.
It is. There's a lot of work associated with it, but I mean, there's a lot of benefits too. We're actually going to do a electric fencing training out in at the organic conference on Friday here in Frankfurt. So I'm kind of excited. I'm sort of right now revving up on that topic anyway, but maybe we'll get to talk about it in a few weeks here. I like electric fencing quite a bit.
I think we'll have another fencing school here in April?
In April, we have 2 of them. Yeah. So we'll try and at least include some discussion about fencing when we get to that time point. But fencing, feeding animals, and we did get one of our 2 bulls out.
Okay.
One of the 2. The other one that I said last week was a hassle. Was not going to come out last week after the fiasco that happened earlier last week. So it's coming out, hopefully, fingers crossed, knocking on wood, but not knocking for your benefit here on the audio files. Hopefully this coming week. We're going to try and pull it out this week on Saturday.
Yeah, we were down, man, and we just ended up, our bulls are still out there. So we just kind of said, we'll get you. Hopefully, we're kind of thinking the same way. Hopefully this weekend. We said that last weekend as well, but
this weekend
is
looking promising.
So
there you go. It looks like a good day Saturday. It looks like it might rain again on Sunday. So my goal is Saturday before the next rain comes in. Not that it's going to be any less wet, but it'll be less miserable to be out trying to run around with a bull if it's not raining or snowing on.
Yeah, I keep hoping for almost hoping for a good freeze at some point. I was like, I need the ground to firm up so I can throw out a bunch of junk hay, there's a lot of things I want to do, but I just need a good freeze for a couple of days to...
Yeah, we're sort of in the same boat. We've been pretty strategic in how we've been feeding hay and how things have been going, but we could really use a good freeze as well. For anyone that lives in an environment not like this, it's very frustrating when it's sitting just at the freezing point or just above and very wet because nothing dries out ever, and it also doesn't get hard enough to take a tractor safely into the field without deteriorating the quality of the field.
Without deciding which annual grass you're going to replant.
That's right. Which grass are you willing to destroy? So that's sort of where that is. But the one thing we're going to talk about today is our hay feeder designs. And we only brought this up because I think you and I both have feeding preferences, and we do use hay feeders as part of our style of feeding. And I actually have differences in what I would want for my cattle and what I'd want for my alpaca. And I assume that you also have some differences in your feeding style for the goats and the cows. But let's just talk a little bit about feeder designs, why we would use a hay ring or some form of a hay feeder, and then how we sort of evaluate them.
So, for the longest time, and we did some of this last year, we've known it for years, but we used some hay rings and then some without hay rings. And we know for a fact when you put in a hay ring, you're able to save some of the hay. Like you're not going to go through it near as fast. We can burn through coal, if we put it out there without a hay ring. But with a hay ring, we're trying to save it and be as efficient as possible, make them eat it down as much as possible, and then go and give them a new bale.
And when you say that you're going through it much faster, how long do you anticipate a roll lasting in the group that you're putting it into?
Let's see. So last year, we had most of our cow calves were together, so we were going through at least 2 bales a day with a ring. Okay. And so if we're not ringed, we're going through maybe 3 to 4 because they just tear it down, line it, trample it, and it's just not getting utilized. And then we have in that next spring, when we go and clean off the pad or push it into a pile, there's a huge, huge pad of just hay material that we have to spread. So it's not being effectively utilized. So that's why we really focus on getting them to eat down what they can and then provided them new bale. So one of the things, for the longest time, so probably for 20 some odd years, we would go out there, they eat it down, we flip the hay ring, get a little bit of extra time, and then do it that way. Give them extra time to clean up what they could. Because we also try to make sure they had plenty of additional hay out there, because usually the ones who they all may be able to fit around one ring, all the cows potentially, but we'd go ahead and try to put at least 2 or 3 just for the animals who are lower on the totem pole.
And the calves. That's the one thing I will say about fall calving is that typically we see a little bit lighter calves at weaning, and it's probably because they get a little bit more restricted access to hay. Especially if hay is limit fed. Or just in general, if it's very muddy near the hay rings, they don't tend to go over there. They don't tend to eat as much volume as they would in the summer on grasses. So I think it's pretty consistent in this area that our fall calvers are lighter at weaning than our spring calvers are at weaning. And I think it's merely how effective they are at getting to the forage.
Yeah.
So sort of like you, we also do that. We also what's interesting is most of our spots are calves. Our fall calves have access through a hot wire to get to another field.
Okay.
And that might not be a great strategy because they can tear up a second field that way, but it also allows them to get out of the mud. So we use a single wire, one that the cows won't go through that is actually hot, but the calves usually will sneak underneath there, and they will either graze on a little bit of, it's not even stockpiled at this point, but a little bit of just remaining grass that's out in the fields, or even just lay on that side where it's a little bit drier.
Right.
Just kind of interesting to watch. But we use hay rings sort of similarly. We want to try and preserve hay, especially in our smaller groups. We will do some bale grazing with our bigger groups and accept like a little bit, but we only will put out as much hay as would be for 1 or 2 days if we're bale grazing without rings. So we never leave a week's worth of hay out.
Right.
And think that it will survive a week, because it never will. If you put 7 days of hay out for animals without rings, it lasts about 4 or 5 days.
Yep.
Without fail. So for us, it's a 1 to 2 day turn anytime we don't have a ring. And we probably still are accepting more wastage. We might be accepting like 20-25% wastage with that design. That's sort of my guess. If we assume 10 or 12 on a ring, which is what most of the literature says a standard ring will give us. So I'm assuming I'm going to lose a amount more than that, but not a huge amount more than that on a 1 day cycle. But if I go to like a 4 day cycle, then all bets are off, I guess, is how I would perceive it. And for the hay is specifically for groups that don't go through, like I have a smaller group of heifers that are getting ready to calve right now. So they're my spring calving heifers, and they're independent of my cow group because they get different management. And so those animals will definitely not go through as much hay. So we put 2 bales out at a time because it's more efficient to take 2 bales with the tractor.
Right.
But 2 bales will last them for a couple weeks. Maybe not quite 2 full weeks, but at least 10 days. So for them, they definitely have rings on them because we want that hay to be protected, because there's no way that it would last like it needs to if we didn't use a ring on them. So that's sort of our approach to using a ring, is that we use rings for sure anytime that we have hay that's not going to, we don't expect it to disappear within 1 to 2 days. And even sometimes if we have it on a hard surface, we might still use a ring, even if we're going to have them go through it pretty quickly. So,
and we've the one thing. So for the 20 years, we didn't have a loader tractor. For a number of years, we didn't have it. So you'd go out there and lift the ring. So we try to make sure they ate as much as possible before you actually flipped it.
Lifted the ring. Yeah, that is one of the challenges with rings, is that they are really heavy. And to be completely honest, if the ground around there has deteriorated, if it's really pugged up, if it's really deep mud, it can be very dangerous for you to go out there and physically move a ring.
Yep.
So that's another challenge that has to be considered.
And that's where you'd have like a feeding pad would definitely help.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, and that's why I said we will use those rings sometimes even on daily turn hay on solid surfaces, because it's not necessarily worth it for us to take a tractor out and tear up to move a ring.
Right.
If it's
going to be bad out there and you're just tearing stuff up. And
yeah, just to move a ring around it's just another step in the process. It can be a little bit more work. So
I know whenever we actually had to lift the rings up, we'd actually preferred the ones that had the bonnet at the bottom, so they had the sheet metal at the bottom, because that way it kept everything in there, because sometimes when you had it would mat up on you if you had to open rings.
Yeah, I think that is true, and I think there's also some literature that shows that solid bottom actually does preserve more hay. And I think around here it could be that it doesn't fall out, which helps, but I think it's also that the mud and stuff doesn't work its way in quite so readily from where those animals are walking and stepping right around the edges. They can push a lot of mud back inward, and that solid bottom keeps a lot of moisture from working in, and a lot less hay gets broken down until you flip it up. And that's when
you let them just have at it and get what they can, clean what they can from it.
Clean up what they can, yeah.
Then,
So this is all about our cattle, which for us is the biggest cost on our feeding structure. But the small ruminants, are a little bit different, right?
Yeah, the small rooms are a little bit different. So we tried some of the, we tried some of the square bale feeders, the little square bale. You had
The cradled
the
ones.
cradled ones. We honestly didn't like them. They was above the feed trough, and they pull it down, and everything would drop into the feed trough. Then you'd have the feed in there. And we just had issues with some mice and other things. So we switched and just had dedicated, and plus just the scale of our farming operation, we already have round bales.
Right.
And I hate handling square bales.
Yeah.
So we just went and used round bale feeders. So it actually keeps them up off the ground. So it's about a foot or two off the ground and cradled.
So the cone design?
The cone design, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, the cone design, I think, in almost all the literature that I've seen, shows the most efficient feeding for cattle. And I would assume that for small ruminants, it's the same. The one challenge with the small ruminants is the ring, sometimes they go inside it.
Yeah.
Sometimes they can't get to the center of the ring. And the cone design, because of how it falls down, as they keep eating it, it keeps working its way down. They continue to be able to get at the hay, and you don't end up with that vertical column in the center, or the ability where you have to flip that bale over and angle it the other direction to get them to eat it, which can be really frustrating. So we currently, with our alpacas, use no form of a ring.
Yep.
And we're currently looking to decide exactly what we're going to use with the alpacas, but we're looking at a cone design or a cradled design, but for a round bale. Probably with some form of a smaller wire mesh in the bottom of it, so they can't stick their head all the way up into it, but so that they can reach in there and pull out of the bottom of a round bale cradle.
Yeah, we had tried, like on my farm, we'd fed some goats there, so it was only about 20 goats, and we put just a bale out there for them, no ring or anything. And so, they eat and eat. And so at some point it looked like a mushroom, like, that looks like a mushroom. It's like they won't, maybe cartoonish, it'll fall over on it. Well, it fell over on him. And so we had to rescue a goat and spend a couple days getting him back to health because he got stuck.
Under a bale of hay, yeah. That is a risk with those smaller animals. And also with smaller calves, that can be a risk as well. Yep. So if someone has just weaned calves, that can be a challenge as well. I don't typically see it as much with calves, and that's mainly probably because a lot of times they're getting big enough at the point when you wean that isn't an issue. But if you are weaning lighter weight calves, that can be a real challenge.
So, that was something we hadn't really thought about until it happened. So once it did, I was like, okay, anytime I see it mushrooming, I can just knock it over.
Yeah. And that's what I was saying when I was saying flip the bale. That was exactly what I meant. That if you put it into a standard ring, you still have to flip the bale over, or it falls to one side, and then the ring doesn't have enough access for all the animals to eat, and then you end up with aggression issues, or potentially you could even have some animals have some late-term abortions if they're getting pushed around too hard later in the pregnancies. So,
and we do use the cradle for the goats, so we use it mainly for the goats, and so we have ones that have fairly long, the horns are a challenge for the goats because sometimes they get up in there and they get stuck. And we do actually rake. So in the cradle itself, we do rake some of the hay down just so it's a little easier for them to get to.
Yeah.
And on those, we actually also put a tarp on top. So some of them actually have it where it'll, has a metal structure where it'll go around the top of the bale and help protect it. But for the most part, we actually found a tarp is probably a little easier. Just throw a tarp, 4x4 or 5x5 tarp on top just to protect that top layer. So when they eat it down, it's still decent.
Yeah. I think that's a great idea. I think that the horse folks that are, interested in round bale feeding, I know not all horse people want round bales, but they use what's known as a hay hut. And I think that's a really nice design. They're very expensive. It's maybe a harder price to justify. Although, to be fair, the cones are not cheap either. Both of them are pretty expensive. All of these are a more expensive design. They're pretty robust. But the price definitely starts to escalate for the more efficient feeders and the more metal and structure associated with it. And actually the hay huts are plastic, so that defies my logic, but they are a very expensive feeder. But I know people that have had a bale sitting out there for one horse, or one round bale will last for the whole season, and it's not a problem, especially if the animal's on pasture and it has a pretty good stand around them. they'll sort of pick at grass, then they'll come up when they're actually hungry and eat from the hay hut, and then they'll go back out. I also know people that use hay nets, but the hay net doesn't protect from weather in the same way, and therefore, even if it keeps them from just really rubbing on the bale so much, they will eventually wear down that, just between weather and rubbing on those hay nets, they still will take it down over time. I've never tried a hay net with a small ruminant, but I know some people that do like them for that as well. Just something to use as an alternative to a ring, lower cost, but not cheap by any means either. But another strategy.
See, we had it's 1 year we tried. We got some extra chain, and so we actually help it. We made a cradle in essence within our hay ring.
Yeah.
And so we tried that, and it did work, but you have challenges with if you have the hay quality is still concern because if you put Johnson grass bale in, it's going to mat up. And so we had a couple of chains suspended across the center, so it would hold the bale up so the cattle could pull through the material, and then we can still capture whatever material down beneath inside that ring as well. So it seemed to work, but cleaning it out and off was kind of a challenge. And
so for something like that, you'd really want a higher quality hay.
Yeah, something like that, you definitely want a higher quality hay.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think that there's a lot of options out there on the market, and I think everyone sort of has their own price point that they're comfortable with and their own priority. I'm willing to accept some wastage because I know I have some hay quality concerns in some of the things that I feed. Mm-hmm. Part of having that hay business is that the highest quality hays get sold, the cleanest hay gets sold, and the lower quality hay gets fed to my animals. I accept that I'm going to have higher wastage because of that. And that's just part of the business that we operate under. So for me, I'm not necessarily willing to pay for the best feeder design, for the most efficient feeder design. But if I was buying the highest quality hay that I sell, the price point that I would pay for a feeder would be significantly higher because the wastage that I'd be willing to accept would be lower.
And I know there was a year we were feeding, and it was actually frozen that year, so we got lucky. But when we were feeding some of our haylage, we were feeding that every 2 days, and so we'd have a ring, we put it in, it would be clean.
Yeah.
And so if we're feeding that high quality stuff, we know that we have to really limit feed them for stuff that they really like.
Right.
But yeah, that definitely went in the ring. Didn't have to worry about it staying around at all.
Yeah. Yeah, frozen ground is nice. That's one of the interesting things. We can talk about that on another day, but the timing on the feeding, I think, is a critical issue in all of this, and it does account for how you would choose a design as well. Like if I'm going to feed every day, the amount I'm willing to spend on my feeder might be different, and the style of feeder that I want to use might also be different. So, some of the cradles and stuff are maybe a little more difficult to move with the tractor if you're moving every day to try and keep from the ground getting too torn up. And so figuring out the mobility of it also probably plays a role depending on the style and where you're placing that feeder.
Yeah, we've never really used, I know there's mobile hay feeders, but we've never really used any of them. And I've heard there still can be a pain because you got to dump out the whole thing.
Yep. Yeah, I also am fairly interested in the mobile feeders from a moving nutrients around the field standpoint. I think there's some value to moving nutrients and also moving animal foot traffic around.
Yep.
But I also think to myself it would be hard to get in there and move it around with our climate right here. I haven't invested in one either. So that's, I think, a pretty good summary of hay feeder design and sort of how we approach it. Let's go ahead and do a update on what we're hoping to do next week so we can tell people about all the things we failed to get done when we get back together then.
So I'm hoping to keep working on my cutter bars, clean them up and do a little bit of welding. And then past that, probably hopefully get the bull out. So the bull comes out this weekend. And then that pretty much, put out some hay, and that's pretty much a weekend at that point.
Yeah, I think similarly, we have hay feeding to do, a bull to get out. We do have a little bit of equipment maintenance to do. I said before, we're sort of planning for fuel purchase for the year. So we have a couple new to us, but not new tanks that we have now that we have to get cleaned up and ready and set up so that we can purchase that fuel. So getting those set up in the right spot.
Okay. And so you distribute on, you guys have a couple farms, distributing one on each farm, you thinking, or?
We currently have plastic tote storage on one farm and one metal tank on a different farm. Ideally, we will have 2 metal tanks where the plastic totes are, and then the one metal that's already on the other farm will stay where it is.
Okay.
And then we have on the truck, we do have a not portable, but we have mobily available about a 50-gallon tank for diesel and 50 gallons for gas on it. So the truck is our transport of fuel when we need to, rather than having to take cans around. But it's still not huge amounts. It's enough to get a tractor or 2 through a day. So we can get through a hay. If we're out on a farm cutting on a leased piece of land or something else, we can get out there with that truck and get done. But we need to have enough storage back on the home places to
fill them back up.
To fill everything back up as we need.
Okay, but it's still good enough to get you through that day.
Absolutely, yeah, that's nice. That is one thing we invested in when we put a new bed on the truck, and I think it was probably a good decision.
And anything else you guys doing, like working with any of the calves or vaccinating?
No, we won't be doing vaccinations this week. We've already done a round with all of ours, and we've already castrated our males, so that's all good to go for right now. They'll come out hopefully early March. We're going to look at prices for selling our calves that we weaned in the fall.
Okay.
We're going to start looking pretty hard at those prices, and we're in the market for bulls. So we've got lots of things we need to buy. We just need to make sure we have enough money to buy them.
Right. Sell enough calves, or plan to sell enough calves to compensate.
Exactly. So that's what's happening on the farm this next week, and we will see you guys next week with another new podcast.
Take care.
Have You Heard is a production of the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food and Environment, along with the Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering. Discover what's wildly possible at ca.uky.edu.